Imagine moving into a new home, ready for a fresh start with your family, only to realize that something unexplainable is already there, watching, waiting. That's exactly what happened in this story. It all began when they moved into the house. A quiet neighborhood, nothing out of the ordinary, just a new place to build their lives with their 3-month-old daughter. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. Unpacking, settling in, getting used to the new routine. But it only took a week before something happened that would haunt them forever. That night, everything seemed routine. She was downstairs, tidying up while her husband slept. Their baby, just 3 months old, lay peacefully in her crib upstairs. The baby monitor sat beside her, a video one with night vision, letting her see the gentle rise and fall of her daughter's tiny chest as she slept. Then, through the quiet hum of the monitor's static, something broke the silence. A whisper, soft, almost too faint to catch, but it was there. At first, she brushed it off, thinking it was just interference, maybe some neighbor's frequency bleeding through. But then, it happened again. Clearer this time. A woman's voice, soft and soothing, almost comforting. "Shh, go back to sleep, baby." Her blood ran cold. She froze. The only people in the house were her husband, and their daughter. No one else. She stared at the baby monitor, her heart racing as she watched her daughter sleep soundly, oblivious to what was happening. Without thinking, she bolted upstairs, heart pounding in her chest. She threw open the door to the nursery, but everything was exactly as she had left it. The room was empty. No one was there. Just the crib and her little girl sleeping peacefully. For the next few weeks, the strange events didn't stop. It was like the house was holding its breath, waiting to reveal more. She'd hear faint humming through the baby monitor, even when the house was completely silent. Once, she walked into the nursery to find the rocking chair moving ever so slightly, like someone had just gotten up from it. But when she checked, there was no one there. Eventually, things seemed to calm down. The voice never returned, and the eerie occurrences stopped for a while. But there were nights when she'd check on her daughter, and though the room was empty, she'd get the overwhelming feeling that someone else was there with her, watching over her baby. Watching, but never seen. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, groggy and disoriented, only to realize something isn't right. It was sometime past midnight, maybe an hour, maybe more. The darkness outside made it impossible to tell. At first, there was just the strange feeling of being awake without knowing why. Something had disturbed the sleep, but what? The room was silent, the air heavy with the quiet of the late night. Then, the sound came, a knock. Then another, and another. A relentless tapping against the door, steady and unceasing. It wasn't frantic, but it wasn't gentle either. It just continued. Lying still in bed, trying to shake off the last remnants of sleep, the thought came. It was probably just the uncle. Maybe he had forgotten his keys again. That had happened before. No need to get up, no need to worry, right? But then, silence. The knocking stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind an eerie stillness. For a moment, everything felt normal again, but a lingering unease settled in. Curiosity won over caution. Stepping out of the bedroom, careful not to make a sound, a peek around the corner revealed the front door standing there, just as it always had. But something was wrong. There was no way anyone could have been knocking. The second door, a sturdy metal gate that was always locked before bed, was still shut. No one could have reached the front door without getting through that first. A chill crawled up the spine as realization set in. This wasn't possible, and yet it had happened. Then another thought surfaced, one far worse than the first: the uncle. He had passed away in the backyard 8 years ago. Frozen in place, struggling to make sense of what was happening, there was only one thing to do: retreat. Back to the bedroom, back to the safety of the walls and the familiar surroundings. Maybe it had all been imagined. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on the mind. And then knock, it started again. The same steady, unrelenting knocking echoing through the quiet house. But this time, it felt different. This time, it wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying. Every instinct screamed not to look. Something felt deeply, horribly wrong. The kind of wrong that made the air feel heavier, like the entire house was holding its breath. Then silence again. The knocking stopped. But the fear didn't fade. It clung on, sinking deeper, twisting in the chest like something alive. And then an old memory surfaced. Something buried, but never truly forgotten. Years ago, after first moving here, there had been an evening in the backyard. A simple task fetching a bucket for Grandma, nothing out of the ordinary. But that was when it happened. A shadow, a figure, black as the night, moving through the yard. Frozen in place, a 9-year-old child too scared to scream, too terrified to run. Just standing there, heart hammering, unable to process what was being seen. And now, all these years later, with the second round of knocking still echoing in the mind, that night came rushing back. The same fear, the same paralysis. As if whatever had been in that backyard all those years ago had never really left. Some fears fade with time, but others linger waiting, watching, reminding. The story was never shared. Not with family, not with friends. Who would believe it? It would be dismissed as a child's imagination, a tale spun for attention or laughs. But that night, that fear, it was real. A fear that didn't just sit in the mind, it buried itself in the bones. And then, a week later, something happened. The sister mentioned hearing knocking. 3 of same relentless tapping against the door. She too assumed it was their uncle, just as had been thought that night. But unlike before, she went to check. She walked to the door, reached for the handle and pulled it open. Nothing, no one there. No footsteps retreating, no shadow vanishing into the night. And yet, the knocking had stopped the second she got to the door. The house never felt right after that. There were always sounds, footsteps where there should be none, knocking in the dead of night. It became something they lived with, an ever-present unease that settled into the walls. No one ever truly figured out what it was. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was something worse. But the only hope, the only comfort in the fear, was this: if there was something knocking, if there was something walking through the house at night, maybe, just maybe, it was their uncle. Imagine you start dating someone, thinking it's going to be a fresh, fun chapter in your life, but instead, it quickly spirals into something terrifying. That's what happened to one guy who got involved with a woman whose past was far darker than anything he could have expected. She had 3 kids, Joe, Sarah, and Jake, and had been through hell with her ex-husband, a man who was abusive and twisted in ways that still haunted her. But she told him that he was the complete opposite of that nightmare. She also made it clear that her kids adored him, especially little Sarah, who had affectionately nicknamed him Sare Bear. Her life was busy. She worked full-time at a children's home for disabled kids and also went to school at night. It was a lot, but he was happy to help out. He'd watch the kids, make dinner, and assist with their homework, just doing what he could to lighten her load. There were moments of peace and normalcy too. He'd take Sarah to her softball practices, feeling the warmth of family even if he wasn't technically a part of it. But things weren't always as peaceful as they seemed. The past, especially the dark part with her ex, loomed over them like a constant shadow. And as time went on, something wasn't sitting right. Something was wrong, far beyond just the ordinary tensions of a complicated family life. Then, everything started to unravel in ways that none of them could have predicted. Things were going smoothly for a while. He'd regularly drive Brandy to the University of Phoenix in Reno, about a half-hour away. Every time, he'd stop to get her a port of sub sandwich, just the way she liked it. It was these little acts of care that made him feel connected, like he was part of something good. Her kids were old enough, around 13 years old, to stay home alone for a few hours while he did these errands. But as things were going well, it was clear that Brandy was carrying something heavy. Her ex-husband, the abusive man who had terrorized her life for years, had just taken his own life. It should have been a sense of relief, maybe even closure, but instead, it left Brandy in a state of guilt. Even though he had beaten her, even though he had made her life a living hell, she couldn't shake the feeling that somehow she was responsible for what happened. The weight of his death, his decision to end it all, gnawed at her, making her question everything about the past. But there was something deeper at play, something unsettling that began to creep in after his death. She wasn't the only one who seemed affected by it. No one could have foreseen just how much darker things would get. It was a night that started like any other, but quickly spiraled into something far more disturbing. He and Brandy were in bed, caught up in a heated argument. As the tension between them built, suddenly there was a loud bang. Without warning, a picture one of her ex-husband, the man who had tormented her for so long, flew off the wall with a violent force and crashed to the floor. It wasn't just the noise that rattled them. There was a strange, unnerving buzz in the air, like an electric charge that made the hairs on their necks stand up. And then came the unmistakable smell of sulfur-like rotten eggs lingering in the room. They both sat there frozen, fully creeped out by what had just happened. It wasn't a simple mishap. Something was deeply wrong, something that went beyond the usual arguments or disagreements. The rest of the night was restless. Sleep was impossible, the air thick with tension and fear, as they both lay there, wondering what they had just experienced. A week later, on St. Patrick's Day, Brandy made a choice that neither of them could have seen coming. Still overwhelmed by the guilt of her ex's death, and perhaps haunted by something more than just her own emotions, she broke it off. But that wasn't the end. What had just happened wasn't a mere coincidence. Whatever was lurking in the shadows of her past seemed to be pulling the strings, and things were only going to get worse from there. After the breakup, life took on a strange and bittersweet turn. He would still run into Brandy's kids occasionally, and each time they would tell him the same thing. They missed him. He missed them too, especially Jake, the third grader with whom he'd spent hours doing reading lessons. Those little moments of connection, helping him learn and grow, stayed with him long after they had parted ways. As for Brandy, she moved forward. She got her degree, secured a job promotion at the place she loved, and just 6 months after their breakup, she married an Army sergeant with 3 kids of his own. It seemed like she was finally putting her past behind her, building a new life, moving on. But for him, the haunting feeling never really went away. The question lingered, was it just a coincidence? Or was there something else at play? Something far darker, lurking in the corners of her past. Something that hadn't been ready to let go just yet. Was there a jealous ghost, clinging to the life they had, still angry, still bitter? Who knows? But the eerie events that started with a flying picture and the smell of sulfur left one chilling thought. Maybe some ghosts never really leave.